Nightcall has been streamed hundreds of millions of times. It opened one of the most acclaimed films of the last 2 decades. It closed the 2024 Paris Olympics in front of a global audience. And almost none of the people who love that song could tell you the real name of the man who made it, because he spent 20 years making sure of exactly that. He built an entire fictional identity, a character who died in 1986 and came back from the dead to make music, specifically so the world would never really see him. On July 28th, the fiction and the real man collided in the worst possible way. Here's who Kavinsky actually was. Let's start with the story almost everyone already knows without realizing it, because Nightcall found most people the same way. In 2011, director Nicholas Winding Refn was assembling the soundtrack for Drive, his neon-lit thriller starring Ryan Gosling as a nameless Hollywood stunt performer who moonlights as a getaway driver. Refn chose a track called Nightcall to open the film, playing over the credits as Gosling's character eases through Los Angeles at night. It was, by any measure, one of the most memorable opening sequences in modern cinema, and it introduced an entire generation of moviegoers to a French producer almost nobody outside dance music circles had heard of. The song's origin traced back to 2010, part of an EP released by an artist performing under the name Kavinsky. And here is where the actual story begins, because Kavinsky was never simply a stage name in the way most performers use one. He was born Vincent Bollorguet on July 31, 1975, in Seine-Saint-Denis, France. He initially pursued acting, appearing in films by his longtime friend, the director Quentin Dupieux, including the 2007 film Steak. Bollorguet was, by multiple accounts from people who worked with him, genuinely shy, uncomfortable with the idea of simply putting his own face on an album cover and calling it a day. So around 2003, using a discarded computer given to him by producer Mr. Oizo, he began building something else entirely, not just music, a complete fictional infrastructure to live inside. In his own words, given in a 2007 interview, he explained it plainly. "Kavinsky is a character I created," he said, "because just putting my face on a record sleeve isn't something that suits me." The character he built was elaborate, specific, and internally consistent across 2 decades of releases. According to the mythology Bollorguet constructed, Kavinsky was a young driver, in some tellings a rogue police officer who crashed his Ferrari Testarossa outside Paris in 1986 and died. 20 years later, in 2006, he returned from the wreck as something between a ghost and a machine, an undead figure with blue-tinted skin and red eyes, eternally cruising the same night roads in the same car, making electronic music from a place that technically shouldn't exist. This wasn't a passing gimmick or a marketing angle cooked up by a label. Bollorguet built it track by track, year by year, until the line between the fiction and the man behind it blurred almost completely. His debut single, released January 16, 2006, was called Testarossa Autodrive. His first EP, released the same day, was titled Teddy Boy and included tracks called The Crash and Ghost. A follow-up EP the next year was simply called 1986, the exact year of the fictional crash, including reworked tracks like Wayfarer and Dead Cruiser, alongside a remix by his frequent collaborator, Sebastian. In 2008, a further EP called Blazer expanded the world even more. Every release added another layer to a backstory drawn from 1980s action cinema, Miami Vice, and the Italian horror films of Dario Argento. Even his choice of equipment fed the mythology. His early recordings, including that first single, were made entirely on a vintage Yamaha DX7 keyboard, the same synthesizer that defined the sound of the exact decade his character supposedly died in. Nothing about the project was accidental. Before any of it, he had cut his teeth on a second-hand Apple computer given to him by Mr. Oizo, teaching himself production from software he barely understood at first, building the sound of a fictional dead man's music from real, borrowed, unglamorous tools. If you're finding this story as fascinating as we are, this is a great time to subscribe. We dig into the real people behind the biggest cultural moments every single week, and the way this story actually resolves is genuinely remarkable. In 2013, Boulorgué released his debut full-length album under the Kavinsky name, Outrun, named directly after Sega's 1986 arcade racing game, the same game that famously featured a Ferrari Testarossa as its player vehicle. The album functioned as a complete narrative, following the revived driver through a world built entirely out of roads, machines, and memory. It reached number 2 on the French charts and cemented Boulorgué as one of the defining architects of an entire genre that grew up around his sound, Synthwave. And then, for years at a time, he would simply disappear. Almost a decade passed between Outrun and his next full release, an EP called Reborn in 2022. A title that critics later noted was almost too fitting for a man who had spent his entire career playing a character who couldn't stay dead. Across 20 years of work, he released only 2 full studio albums. In an industry that increasingly rewards constant output, Boulorgué worked at the pace of someone who had already decided the mythology mattered more than the metrics. The world caught up to him properly in 2024. At the closing ceremony of the Paris Olympics, held in his home country, Kavinsky performed Nightcall live alongside the French band Phoenix and singer Angèle in front of a global television audience. The performance triggered a massive resurgence for the track. A new official studio version featuring Angèle and Phoenix was released that September, went on to achieve Diamond certification in France, and climbed to number 3 on the French singles chart 14 years after the song's original release. A year later, in 2025, the Irish rock band Inhaler recorded a guitar-driven cover of Nightcall for Triple J's Like a Version series, later pressed onto a physical 7-inch single. The song that opened Drive in 2011 was, by 2025, still actively finding new audiences and new forms. Then, on the evening of Tuesday, July 28, 2026, a worried neighbor in Paris contacted emergency services after not seeing Boulorgué around as usual. According to French newspaper Le Figaro, he had reportedly been suffering from headaches in the days leading up to that night. His body was found at his Paris home at approximately 10:30 p.m. He was 50 years old, just days short of his 51st birthday. The Paris prosecutor's office confirmed that an investigation into the cause of death had been opened, noting that first responders found no suspicious elements at the scene. Police reportedly suspected he may have suffered a stroke, though that has not been formally confirmed by authorities. The tributes that followed came from the very top of French public life. President Emmanuel Macron posted a message calling him simply Kavinsky, French pride forever. French Culture Minister Catherine Pégard wrote that with his sudden departure, France had lost one of its most unique and distinctive voices, adding that his music, both danceable and nostalgic, would go on crossing generations and borders. Here's what makes his story genuinely different from most artists who build a persona. Boulorgué never really broke character to cash in on his own mystery. He didn't do a big reveal tour or a documentary unmasking himself once he'd achieved global recognition through Drive in the Olympics. He kept the Kavinsky mythology intact, consistently, for 2 decades, even as the song built out from a cult synthwave hit into something performed in front of billions of people at an Olympic closing ceremony. The shy actor who once said his own face didn't belong on an album cover got exactly what he built toward. A character so complete that most of the world who loved his biggest song couldn't have named the man singing it. And he seemed to have wanted it that way until the very end. That's the real story behind Nightcall. Not a mystery marketing campaign. Not an industry gimmick. A genuinely private, self-described shy man who built an entire fictional universe, brick by brick. Specifically so, he would never have to stand fully in the light his music eventually created. He spent 20 years driving through a night that never technically ended. On July 28th, it finally did. That is who Vincent Boulorgué really was, behind the character that made him a legend. If you want more true stories like this one, the next video is already waiting for you. Go watch it now. We will see you there.